Good morning, everyone. Good morning for the opportunity provided here. The topic of the day today will be connected medical equipment from the perspective of EMC and radio requirements. Sure. Okay. So I hope you are able to see my screen. Thank you. So we will be dwelling on today on this. The subjects will be scope, the terms, EU Medical Device Regulation 2017-745, an overview of basic requirements, a combination of medical devices with a radio interference, regulatory framework for Europe, a regulatory framework for US and Canada, and some EMC requirements stemming from the EN 6060-1, 60601-1-2 standard, which is the basis for medical devices in almost all countries. Medical device regulation. I mean, I don't think I have to explain what medical devices are to this group. I mean, to the participants, everyone knows what the medical devices are, what the medical device regulation is about. But allow me to skim through some of the definitions of medical device regulation. A medical device regulation covers all medical devices that previously fell in the scope of Medical Device Directive, MDD, 9342 EEC, and all products regulated under the previous Active Implant Medical Device Directive, AIMDD, which is also known as 9385 EEC. So what's different in medical device regulation, medical devices regulation? A key element of the medical device regulation is the introduction of European database in order to increase transparency, ensure traceability of medical devices, and to facilitate the flow of information between manufacturers and users of medical devices. There are several other changes. The most important changes are the extended areas of application, including non-medical devices, UDI, unique product number for every medical device, more stringent requirements for technical documentation. Stringent requirements have been placed for responsible persons. Expert knowledge of medical devices would be needed. New scrutiny procedures for high-risk medical devices. More stringent requirements for clinical assessments and testing. Data collection to continue even after market launch. Notified bodies will be strictly regulated, even more so than with MDD. New bodies to be chosen and they will be inspected. Like I mentioned, one of the significant changes is EUDA-MED, Europe-wide database for medical devices to provide more transparency and cooperation. EUDA-MED will be integrating various information or databases, for example, registration of products with unique UDI, unique device identification number, as well as for market players, conformity assessment procedures, certificates, notified bodies, or even incidents on clinical trials. The notification procedures and procedures for monitoring notified bodies are regulated more in detail in MDR. They are stricter and meant to result in further harmonization of the requirements. This will enable the notified bodies to comply with the current requirements and thus ensuring a higher level of quality and safety for medical devices. Furthermore, the notified bodies are required, among other things, to employ more physicians or clinical experts and to ensure a rotation of lead auditors for audits. Sorry, I'm really sorry about that. So medical device regulation, I mean, talking about medical device regulation, we need to know starting May 26, 2021, manufacturers and new products must meet the new medical device regulation requirements in order to be marketed in the European Union. Medical devices that are still covered by a directive certification may continue to be to be marketed until the end of the validity of the certificate, but no later than May 26, 2024. However, this transitional period only applies if the requirements continue to be monitored by the previous notified body if the requirements are being met, such as surveillance of the products placed on the market or the reporting of adverse events, and if no significant changes are made to the design or the intended purpose of these products. The transition period is coming to an end on the May 26, 2021, and new products have to be products that are going to be brought into the market starting May 26, 2021, they would have to apply MDR. Coming to the topic of connected medical equipment, even so more, we find a trend of more and more medical equipment being connected, and there are some common wireless standards that are being used for connecting these medical equipment with the user, with the clinic, uh, with the doctors, so on and so forth, or connecting medical equipment with each other in a so-called medical body area network, and M-bands and MANs, or medical area network, so to speak. Some of the common connected medical equipment are remote health examination kits, wireless medical implants, smart healthcare monitoring systems for asthma, wearables, intelligent snore stoppers, automatic pill dispensers, human-centric lighting, so on and so forth. Some of the common technologies or common wireless standards that are used are Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, LTE, RFID, NFC, Zigbee, so on and so forth. I mean, LTE not being the only mobile communication network, but also a fallback on 3G and 2G is also possible. When we talk about regulatory framework, a regulatory framework is decided by the sovereignty of a country by itself. For us, Europe is so-called is bound with one regulatory framework, or Europe comes under a regulatory framework by itself. In Europe, for one medical device, there are two directives if it is a connected equipment. A connected equipment is an equipment that has a wireless functionality associated with it. In Europe, these directives are MDR for the medical device and RED for the radio equipment directive. I'm actually hearing myself. Medical device regulation, which is also called MDR, stems from the risk management ISO 14971, and then the relevant IEC 60601-1-X, the safety relevant standards, followed by IEC 60601-1-2, the EMC standard, which we will delve into in much more detail in the next coming slides. The emissions under 60601-1-2 are according to CISPA 11 standard, and immunity tests are laid down on the enclosure ports, on the input AC ports, input DC ports, patient coupling ports, signal input and output ports. And then when we talk about the radio equipment directive, the radio equipment directive speaks about essential requirements, which are laid out in Article 3.1, Article 3, of which the three most important articles are Article 3.1a, health and safety, Article 3.1b, EMC directive according to 2014 30 EU, and of which the ETSI standards are the standards that are harmonized under this article, and then Article 3.2 for spectrum. So you might be asking a question, what's the difference between the EMC on the IEC 60601-1-2 and the EMC on Article 3.1b? The EMC on Article 3.1b focuses on the wireless communication, whereas the EMC on IEC 60601-1-2 focuses on the essential criteria of the medical devices. That's a fundamental difference here. When we look at regulatory framework, the same also applies for US and US. There are two regulatory bodies, FCC for communication and FDA for the wireless device by itself. Under FCC, there are two parts for a connected device. One is the EMC, which is under Part 15 or through Part 18, and then the radio communication parts are covered depending on the wireless standard that is used, and there are several FCC relevant parts, like for instance FCC Part 22, 24, 27 for mobile communication networks, FCC Part 15, Part C for short-range devices like Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, Zigbee, so on and so forth. And these rules lay down individual test standards or test requirements like radiated spurious emissions, operating bandwidth, antenna requirements, 6 dB bandwidth, EIRP, spectral density, and apart from that, a specific absorption rate as well, a so-called SAR measurements. The medical part of the device is regulated by FDA, which also has put in regulations or put in requirements for wireless medical device coexistence. More and more medical devices are being found in the hospitals, in medical environment, operating in a certain area, occupying a certain spectrum, and causing interference to each other. So FDA has gone across and said a coexistence testing has to be done, and these tests are carried out according to ANSI C6327, and the risk management is given in the standard AAMI-TIR 69. For the medical part of for the medical device itself, the harmonized standards are laid down according to IEC 60601-1-X for safety, as well as the EMC part -2, and with a risk management in place. For Canada, similar kind of structure also for regulatory framework. The Health Portfolio Agency regulates the standards for wireless medical devices, which is also in line with FDA, except that there are no requirements for wireless coexistence testing. On the other side, the communication part of the wireless medical devices are regulated by ISED, Innovation, Science and Economic Development branch. I hope you guys are able to see my presentation. Yeah, so the mains terminal disturbance voltage, the conducted emissions are under CISPA 11, ISO 737, RTCCA, and the harmonic current emissions under IEC 61003-2. Voltage changes, voltage fluctuations and flickers emissions according to IEC 61003-3 for both PST and PLT, PST being short-term, PLT being long-term, flicker and fluctuations, and then the radiated emissions or radiated disturbance according to CISPA 11 from 30 to 1 megahertz. Yeah. And depending on 30 megahertz to 1 gigahertz, either class A or class B limits, and depending on the number of, depending on the frequency, the clock frequency, the measurements could go up, higher up. Yeah. Just a second. So the immunity part is again the standard electrostatic discharge immunity, IEC 61004-2. Contact discharges, air discharges, contact discharges with plus or minus 8 kV, air discharges with plus 2 kV all the way till plus minus 2 kV all the way till plus minus 15 kV. Radiated RF electromagnetic field immunity, IEC 61004-3 from 80 to 2.7 gigahertz, either 3 or 10 volt per meter, a dwell term of 3 seconds. The immunity tests on the cables are divided into three parts: immunity to to the RF fields for conductor RF frequency, immunity on the AC cables, on the DC cables, on signaling ports, and on the patient ports. All of them start at 0.15 megahertz till 80 megahertz, and either with 3 or 6 volt RMS, and with a dwell time of 3 seconds or more, depending on the reaction time of the device. So followed by some more tests, electrical fast transients and burst immunity testing according to IEC 61004-4 plus minus 2 kV, and transients on the signaling ports, signal input ports, signal output ports, and surge immunity tests for AC and DC. As well as for signal input ports and signal output ports, followed by voltage dips, short interruptions, and voltage variations immunity. IEC 6061-1-2 is the basis of all the EMC tests that are performed on a medical device, and depending on the region, the national deviations of that particular region or country will apply. For instance, the deviations of Europe will have to be applied, along with if the intention is to enter the markets of US and Canada, then the deviations of US, Canada should also be applied. With that, I end my presentation. I apologize. We had a technical difficulty. You were unable to hear me. If there are any further questions on this topic or questions related to previous slides which you were unable to follow, please take the opportunity to ask me these questions in the question answer session, and I'm happy to answer them. Thanks a lot.